At Solace Memorial, where wealth often replaced faith and serenity was something you paid for, hope came with a receipt. In the elite East Wing, Suite E1 looked nothing like a hospital room. With its dark oak paneling, polished stone floors, and freshly arranged lilies changed every morning, it could have passed for a presidential suite. The only reminder of suffering was the man lying in the center of it all, cold, motionless, radiating anger, like an open wound that refused to clot. Julian Cross, venture capitalist, media darling, and once crowned Visionary of the Year, had recently survived a high-profile car crash. Headlines were still echoing his name, speculating and spinning, but he hadn't died. Instead, he woke up with a shattered femur, a broken arm, and angry lacerations along his back, places he couldn't reach alone. That, more than the pain itself, seemed to drive him mad. In just 2 weeks, 6 nurses had walked out of his room, some after hours, one after mere minutes, all pale, shaken, whispering the same thing. He's every caregiver's worst nightmare. That morning, the windows were fogged with the breath of dawn, light slicing sideways through the misted glass. The door opened quietly. A young woman stepped inside. Lena Hart. Younger than the others. Still. Composed. Her uniform pristine, her hair secured into a tight knot. She didn't hesitate, didn't smile, just walked in with a tray and eyes that didn't dart away. Julian didn't even look up. His voice, cool and dry, sliced through the quiet. I don't need anyone. Leave. The air hung still. 1 second, 2. Lena didn't blink. She set the tray gently on the table and replied, voice low but steady. Can you reach the wounds on your back by yourself? The words were soft, but they landed like truth, wrapped in velvet, undeniable and unexpected. Julian looked up, truly seeing her now. Her gaze wasn't defiant, nor afraid, just steady, unnerving. As if she weren't standing before a billionaire, but simply a man in need. He scoffed. Do you even know who I am? Lena didn't flinch. I know you're not invincible. Your spine says otherwise, and unless you want a hospital bed in isolation for infection, that incision needs redressing. The atmosphere shifted, tightened. For once, Julian had no biting comeback. Something flickered behind his eyes. Not anger. Maybe surprise, like a creature trained to attack, finally facing someone who neither ran nor fought. Lena didn't wait for permission. She pulled a chair over, slipped on gloves. I'll be quiet, if that's what you want. But I'm here because you need care, even if that truth grates on you. She said it plainly, like stating the time, like the kind of honesty you couldn't argue with. Julian didn't say another word, but more importantly, he didn't tell her to leave. And for the first time, a nurse stayed past the first day. Lena returned the next morning, and the morning after that. No one greeted her, no one thanked her. But the door to Suite E1 was never locked. And Julian, though he never once said stay, had also stopped saying go. So an unspoken truce formed between them. She wouldn't ask questions. He wouldn't push her away. Between bandaging wounds, measuring vitals, and carefully administering drops to strained eyes, silence filled the room like tension in a held breath. Julian's words when he spoke were always cold, clipped and sharp. Lena, as always, met them with calm stillness. Neither yielded, neither erupted. But beneath that quiet, something began to shift slow, almost imperceptible, like frost beginning to crack beneath the surface of a frozen lake. A week passed. Then, one dull afternoon, clouds pressing low against the windows, the storm came. Not from the sky, but from within. Julian, clad in a slate-gray robe, sat hunched at the edge of the bed, eyes fixed on his tablet. The stock market danced mockingly on the screen, green and red lines twisting like cruel jokes. Lena entered with a tray of supplies, set it down, just like every day. Julian didn't look up. His voice cut through the stillness. "Don't make it hurt like last time. I hate the feeling of skin being peeled open." Lena slid on her gloves in silence. He kept going. "I've hired the best money can buy. Compared to them, you're more intern than nurse." That's when the storm broke, not outside, but behind her eyes. Lena looked up, and this time her voice had changed. No longer soft, but steady, low, and resonant, like thunder just before it rolls. "You can fire me. Call your administrator. I'll walk." The room stilled. Julian looked up, startled, thrown off his axis for the first time. Lena went on, each word striking like a hammer against glass. "But don't ever mistake someone's kindness for something you can own. Don't think because I've been quiet. I'm here for your approval. I stayed because I still believe people can heal not just bones and blood, but the kind of hurt that never shows up on scans." Her face caught the slant of late light, deep shadows beneath her tired eyes. "I'm not here to save you. I'm doing my job like any human should, with decency and care. If that looks like weakness to you, then you've never known what strength really is." She didn't wait for a reply, didn't storm out, just turned, shoulders squared, and left quiet and certain. No glance back. Julian watched her go, unsure why. Maybe because her words still lingered in the air, like smoke refusing to clear. Maybe because, for the first time, he'd seen real exhaustion in her face, not from the hours or the wounds, but from him. He leaned back against the pillow. Sunlight stretched long across the cold stone floor. The suite remained immaculate. Machines hummed in soft synchrony. The world outside stayed hushed behind thick walls. And yet he had never felt so alone. When the evening nurse came to offer his medication, Julian merely nodded, said nothing. Inside him, something had begun to stir. Not a landslide, but a dusting of truth disturbed by light, revealing corners of himself he had never wanted to see. He was still Julian Cross, but after today, he was no longer the version of himself he had built to survive. The last rays of daylight slipped away from Suite E1 like a silent tide, retreating without sound or spectacle. No outbursts, no shattered glass, just stillness. Julian sat there unmoving, his eyes locked on the clean white bandage wrapped around his arm, staring at it like it asked a question he no longer knew how to answer. No one spoke to him the rest of the evening. And for once, he didn't tell them to leave. For the first time in years, Julian Cross wasn't sure he was the one in control. Night fell. The ceiling lights hummed softly, casting a faint amber glow across the glass windows. His reflection stared back worn, unfamiliar, eyes sunken beneath years of pride and pressure. From the hallway, the gentle rhythm of hospital life at night played on, the quiet percussion of footsteps, the soft sighs of IV pumps, wheels rolling over tile. Then, from beyond the wall, a voice, not loud, not meant to carry, but it did. From the staff lounge next door, a woman's voice, unsteady, real, human. Yes, Mom, I'm okay. Don't worry. I'm not falling apart. Julian turned his head toward the sound before he even realized he'd moved. Lena. He hadn't meant to listen, but her voice slipped into the room uninvited, unfiltered, and into him. This patient is driving me insane, she said with a tired laugh. I've never met someone so cold, so sharp. Julian flinched not at her honesty, but at how familiar her exhaustion sounded. Then she said something else, and he stopped breathing, but I think he's more lonely than he is cruel. Silence. A long, aching pause that filled his chest with a weight he didn't recognize, at least not recently. Lonely. The word echoed through him like wind through an empty hall. A word he'd buried beneath stock portfolios, penthouse suites, polished shoes, and power. The word he denied with every board meeting and every locked door. Now, spoken quietly by a nurse he barely knew. It felt like truth. Undeniable. Softly delivered and devastating. He looked around his room again. Flawless. Expensive. And utterly lifeless, just like him. Julian sat upright, bones stiff, joints groaning as if they too resisted change. His arm reached behind, toward the bandages on his back. But he couldn't reach, and for the first time, he didn't feel rage. He felt empty. In the reflection of the window, her shape mirrored his separate rooms, same ache. And right then, in the thick armor he'd worn for years, something shifted. A crack. Not loud, not visible, but real. Because sometimes the softest truths leave deeper echoes than any scream ever could. Meanwhile, Lena barely slept that night. It wasn't the IV pump or the flickering light outside the break room door. It was her own voice, raw and honest, echoing like a confession she hadn't meant to share. She didn't know if Julian had heard her, didn't know if he understood. But she felt exposed. Not because she'd failed, but because she had been real. The next morning, the sky was still wrapped in mist. A soft grayness coated the windows like uncertainty. That in-between space. Half rain, half weariness. And yet, in her chest, Lena carried something small and breakable. Not hope for gratitude, not a wish to be acknowledged, but maybe, just maybe, behind the cold, he had heard her, and maybe, even for a moment, he had let it reach him. Lena didn't want an apology. She just hoped quietly, desperately, that he would stop pushing people away. Julian sat on the edge of his hospital bed, still in gray scrubs. A tablet rested in his hands, screen glowing, but his eyes unfocused, vacant, read nothing. His face was expressionless, cold, like a frozen lake on a windless day. Lena entered, tray in hand, prepared for her usual routine. Behind her, a neurologist polished and exact stepped in to conduct rounds. Her eyes swept the room with the cool efficiency of someone trained to assess cooperation without a single word. Lena passed her the patient chart, then stepped back. Like always, like clockwork. It should have been another quiet clinical morning. But then Julian spoke. No preface, no emotion, just cold, detached words. I don't know what you use, shampoo, lotion, whatever it is, but the smell's unpleasant. The words dropped like ice cubes hitting stone. Then, a beat later, without even glancing at Lena, I haven't been sleeping. Could be the lights you leave on when you change my dressings. And just in case the knife hadn't twisted deep enough, he turned to the doctor and added, I used to think the best nurses knew how to be present without being seen. Maybe I've just expected too much. No one moved, no one smiled, and no one needed to say a thing. Because Lena already understood. This wasn't criticism. It wasn't even about the light. It was erasure, a complete undoing of every quiet moment she'd offered without asking for anything in return. There was no trace in his voice of the night before, no flicker of recognition, only the smooth, practiced cruelty of a man who had learned to strike first, so no one could ever get close enough to strike him. When the doctor left, silence returned. But it wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of silence that presses against your chest until you can hear your own heartbeat thudding behind your ribs. Lena didn't move. Her hands remained curled around the tray, but inside her, something had already broken beyond repair. Her voice came quiet, yes, but no longer soft. I'll be requesting a transfer today. Julian didn't even glance up. Suit yourself. 2 words, enough to crush every fragile thread of hope she dared to hold. Lena turned, walked out. The door clicked shut, behind her sharp and final, like a thread snapping. Down the hall, in the cool sterility of the supply room, Lena braced her hands against a metal shelf and took a deep breath. But nothing could steady the sting burning in her throat. She had believed truly that if she poured out enough quiet kindness, it would find a way through. That some people just needed time. That love of any kind was patient enough to reach them. Maybe she was wrong. In her mind, her mother's voice echoed, firm and unrelenting. You don't have to break yourself trying to be good to everyone. Some people don't want to be saved. Lena's hands trembled, not from rage, but from something deeper emptiness. Her kindness, once steady and generous, now felt like a candle flickering on its last bit of wax, still glowing, but barely. And Julian Cross, the man she once believed might finally let someone in, had blown it out with nothing more than a few careless words. That night, Lena didn't return. Julian told himself it didn't matter. Shift rotations, staffing schedules, temporary inconveniences. He'd replaced hundreds of people in his empire, cut names from payrolls, fired executives with a sentence, and forgotten them by lunch. So why did he wake the next morning with a pressure in his chest? Not pain, not illness, something heavier, thicker, like dust that refused to brush off. At exactly 7:45, there was a knock. No calm voice asking, "May I come in?" Just the clatter of cartwheels and the sound of gloves snapping into place. "Good morning, Mr. Cross," said a tired voice. "I'm Nurse Helen. I'll be covering your shift this morning." No smile, no gentle tone, no quiet respect, just routine. Efficient, sterile, like the room, like him. Helen reviewed his chart with mechanical focus. Her hands moved, but her eyes didn't linger. And for the first time, Julian realized what was missing. It wasn't professionalism. It wasn't care. It was presence. And it was gone. Nurse Helen moved quickly, efficient, practiced, but every motion felt mechanical, like she was wiping down a surface, not tending to a person. Julian lay still, eyes open, but not really seeing. In the fog of his thoughts, something surfaced, an old, unwelcome feeling. I need her to come back. He shook his head, almost violently. No, not now, not again. Helen peeled away the dressing on his shoulder. It didn't hurt. She hadn't done anything wrong. But something was missing. Not skill, not technique, presence. Lena didn't just bandage wounds. She noticed things. She listened. She had that presence, that stillness that made people sit a little straighter, not out of duty, but because she made them feel seen. She never left behind perfume, but somehow she left something more lasting. A feeling that maybe, just maybe, you weren't facing this alone. Now, as Helen rewrapped the wound in silence, Julian's chest tightened, not from pain, but from the absence that had started to take shape inside him. It didn't look like any absence he'd ever known. Lena was gone. No more quiet voice. Steady and unwavering. No more hands that moved with care and eyes that saw beneath the surface into the fractures he never admitted were there. There was movement now, but no connection. There was a nurse in the room, but not her. When Helen finished and left, the door clicked closed. Suite E1 returned to what it had always been before her, spotless, bright, lifeless. Julian stared up at the ceiling, and again, the thought returned, uninvited and undeniable. She's gone. His chest rose sharply, like he'd just sprinted a mile, though he hadn't moved at all. Then something kicked in. Some dormant instinct, older than pride. He sat up, reached for the phone, dialed reception, and for the first time, his voice didn't carry command. It carried something far more fragile. "This is Cross. I want to see Nurse Lena Hart." A pause. "Then I'm sorry, Mr. Cross. Hart requested a shift transfer. She's no longer assigned to VIP care." He closed his eyes. One beat, two, then a long, ragged exhale like he was forcing pride out of his lungs. He opened his eyes again. His next words were quieter, but more real than anything he'd said in years. "I want her back. I'm requesting her personally. Tell management. Tell them the patient needs her. Needs, not for productivity, not for convenience, but from that hollow space in his chest. That ache, no bandage could fix. Not everyone could change him. Most never even came close, but she did. And if he let her walk away for good, he knew deep down there'd be no one else who could ever take her place. If you felt your chest tighten the moment he whispered, "I need her," you're not alone. Because sometimes even the coldest hearts remember what it means to feel. That afternoon, no one responded right away. Julian remained seated, phone still in hand, as if setting it down would somehow erase the words he'd just spoken aloud. I need her to come back. And for the first time in his life, he realized that power couldn't summon presence. Not real presence. It had to be earned, and maybe gently asked for. A few hours later, the medical supervisor stepped into his room. She didn't speak, just placed a transfer request form in front of him. Under reason for request, there were boxes expertise, good rapport, patient morale. Julian didn't check any. Instead, he picked up a pen, wrote by hand, slowly, deliberately at the bottom, because she's the only one who never treated me like a failed investment. The supervisor looked at him, didn't say a word, but something in her expression softened. That evening, Julian wrote another note, short, plain, unpolished. West Garden, 5 p.m. No Blackwell. Just his first name. Just an invitation. Julian, 5 p.m. West Garden. Lena read the note at exactly 2:03 p.m. She folded it slowly. Didn't cry. Didn't smile. But something in her heart lifted just a little, because for the first time, his name stood alone. Not Mr. Cross, not Blackwell Inc., just Julian. She wasn't sure if she'd go, but sometimes the heart moves long before reason even has a chance to speak. The West Garden was the only place in the hospital that still felt untouched by protocol. Real, alive. The breeze moved gently, catching the last red maple leaves midair as they drifted down. The lavender shrubs were dry now, but their fragrance lingered. Faint echoes of something beautiful, something fleeting, that had once truly been. Julian stood there. No wall to lean on, no wheelchair, no mask of power, just a man, waiting, for someone, for something. When Lena appeared, they stood only a few feet apart, but it felt like the distance of a lifetime. No rush, no dramatic words, just the soft ache of truth hanging between them. Then Julian spoke. His voice wasn't loud, but it was real. You once said I could fire you. He lifted his gaze. No shields this time, only bare honesty in his eyes. But now, I'm just asking you not to leave. The wind moved between them. Lena didn't blink, but her heart shifted. A quiet chord struck somewhere deep inside her. Julian stepped forward, just once. Not to assert anything, but to close the gap that had always been carved by loneliness. His voice softened, peeled back layer by layer. I used to think if no one got close, no one could betray me. I thought coldness kept me safe. But then you came, not asking anything, not promising anything, just doing what was right. And somehow, I started to believe that maybe not everyone wants to hurt me. Lena took a breath, steady. So what is it you really want from me, Julian? No titles. No distance. He lifted his head, clear-eyed. I want you to stay. Not because it's your job, but because you choose to. I'm afraid if you walk away again, I won't find anything real left inside me. Lena stepped closer. Not touching him, but close enough for her eyes to say, the rest I used to think I couldn't trust you. But today, I see a man trying to hold on to what's right, not with power, but with honesty. A small, almost smile lifted her lips. If you take one step forward, I'll stay. But if you step back, I'll be gone for good. Julian drew a breath. Then he stepped, just once. But it was the first true step, not of a powerful man, but of someone finally becoming human. He didn't pull her close, didn't grab her hand. He simply reached out, open, unforced, real. Lena looked at his hand, paused, then placed hers in it, like someone returning trust, to a heart long convinced it had none left to give. And there in a garden where most things were fading, something quietly began to bloom. No grand declarations, no promises, just love in its purest form, chosen. 1 week later, the wounds on Julian's shoulder had begun to heal, but the ones inside him, they were just beginning their journey. That morning, like any other, Lena stepped into Suite E1, reviewed the chart, checked the vitals. But something had changed. Julian wasn't lying back, waiting. He looked up, eyes steady, voice warm. Good morning. Just 3 simple words. But to Lena, they meant more than any gift ever could. That afternoon, the ground floor rec room, often forgotten, had been rearranged. Soft lighting, a long table dressed in a white cloth, a few trays of pastries, some juice. Nothing fancy, but it was thoughtful. At the center of the table stood a single card, propped carefully upright. It read, "A small gathering in the name of gratitude," and it was addressed to every nurse, every technician, every hand that had ever shown care in the shadows, to all medical staff who had cared for Julian Cross. At first, no one believed it. He invited us. What's the catch this time? But curiosity has a quiet pull. And one by one, they came. Night shift nurses, fresh recruits, supervisors, even department heads. The rec room filled slowly, cautiously, as if the very air inside it was holding its breath. Julian stood at the head of the long table. No assistant beside him. No microphone in front of him. Just himself. A man once known for orchestrating entire companies with a single command. Now, standing alone. No script. No shield. Only truth. Lena stood at the far end, hands wrapped around her shift notebook. Not tense, not guarded, just watching, waiting, to see if the man she'd once held hands with in the garden was still standing there. Julian began to speak. No grand opening, no dramatic performance. I used to think I didn't need anyone, that if I paid people on time, I owed no one gratitude. He paused, took a breath. His gaze didn't falter. I've said things I shouldn't have. I've treated more than a few of you unfairly. I pushed people away because I was in pain. No one interrupted. No one shuffled or whispered, because no one had ever imagined Julian Cross would say the words, "I'm sorry." Then he continued, slower now. I was wrong, and I learned that from one person in this room. Every gaze followed his. To Lena. Her face didn't change, but in her eyes, something shimmered. Not from sentiment, but from the quiet ache of recognition. The realization that, finally, she wasn't alone in what she'd believed. Julian kept going. Thank you for not giving up, even when I didn't deserve it. Thank you for showing me that some people are kind, not because it benefits them, but because that's who they are. No one clapped, no one laughed. But in that room, something shifted. Because if someone like Julian Cross could stand before his former staff and speak those words, then maybe no one was too far gone to change. As the crowd began to thin, Lena passed by him. She didn't stop, didn't look back. But as she walked past, she said, simply, "The first thank you should go to you for doing the hardest thing of all." Julian turned, nodded gently, and in both their eyes, there were no more questions. Just one thing left unwritten: waiting. 3 weeks later, Solace Memorial returned to its usual rhythm. As if the man who had once turned the entire East Wing upside down had never been there at all. No one spoke about Julian Cross anymore. Lena didn't either. She had resigned quietly. No tears, no spectacle, no regrets. She moved to a small town by the river, where mornings began with the soft chime of the bread truck, and evenings closed with golden sunsets spilling over the water. No one there knew. She had once worked for one of the wealthiest, most impossible men in the country, and she liked it that way. She rented a one-story cottage with a white frangipani tree blooming by the porch. She learned how to tend plants, how to let silence stop being punishment and become part of her healing. One Sunday afternoon, the rain had just passed. Sunlight sparkled on water droplets clinging to the leaves. Lena stepped onto her porch, folding a blanket still warm from the line, when she heard a car pull up. No horn, no urgency, just the quiet hush of tires slowing on gravel. She looked up. A black sedan rested beside the white wooden gate. The door opened. Julian stepped out. No bouquet of $9.99 roses. No designer suit. No polished shoes. No performance. Just Julian. In a weathered khaki jacket, hair slightly tousled, shoes muddy from the drive, and in his hand a brown paper bag, edges wrinkled, as if it had been held too tightly for too long. Lena said nothing. She didn't smile. She just leaned against the porch railing and waited. Julian looked up at the woman standing above him. The same woman who once stood firm in the face of words sharp enough to cut and never backed down. His voice rose, just enough to meet the distance. "I learned how to make soup." For someone with a cold, a pause. Then a smile, gentle, hesitant, perhaps the first one he'd ever truly meant. "Last time, you took care of me. Today, I'm here to ask if you're ever tired. Can I be the one to care for you?" Lena didn't respond with words, but something in her gaze, that steady, steady gaze, softened. Julian stepped closer to the gate. He didn't open it, didn't push forward. He simply reached through the narrow wooden slats, holding out a brown paper bag. "I'm not here to start over," he said softly. "I'm here to start for the first time, as myself." Lena looked at him for a long, quiet moment. Then she moved light and slow down the wooden steps. Julian didn't move. She reached the gate, opened it, took the bag from his hand. Inside, a container of soup, still warm, carefully sealed. Not from a restaurant, not delivered by an assistant. No label, no chef's name. Just soup, made by a man who once thought power could shield him from needing anyone. Made with gratitude. Lena looked up at him. Her voice was calm, clear. "Making soup doesn't prove much. But bringing it here? That's a big step. Julian let out a soft laugh, short, but honest. I can learn to make porridge, bake bread, even do the dishes. Then he looked straight at her. But there's one thing I don't want to learn from anyone else: how to stay beside someone without making them feel small. Lena didn't say anything, but she opened the gate a little wider, then turned and walked inside, leaving the front door open behind her. Julian stood there for a moment, still. Then he stepped forward. No grand soundtrack, no sweeping speeches, no fireworks, just an open door, a wooden table, an empty chair, a pot of soup, still warm, and two people with nothing left to protect, no armor left to wear, just the courage to begin. From the quietest place of all, the heart. If you believe in a kind of love that outlasts pride, that softens even the hardest edges, that finds its way back not with promises, but with presence, please like this video, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so we can keep telling the kinds of stories that reach the silent corners of the soul, where logic can't always go, but love knows the way.